In previous lectures, we have discussed about the intercellular communications and junctions. Mainly, we have focused into the junction part. So, in today's lectures, we will try to what are the different types of cellular communications that are present in multicellular organisms, and what are the different mechanisms that we will try to discuss here. So let us start with some basic concept. These are the main topics or subtopics that we will discuss. The first is the basic concept of cell communication, then cell signaling process, intracellular signaling pathways, and finally cell signaling types. Let me start with some definitions. What do you mean by cell communications? It is nothing. It is the physiological process of which two adjacent cells or two cells connect with each other by sending some chemical informations or chemical messages from one cell to another. In cell to cell communications, two important events are: one is sending the chemical signals and receiving the same signals by adjacent cell. In cell communications, there are different components involved. What are the most important components that involve the cell communications? Obviously, cells. The first one. Then there are certain types of messenger molecules or chemical molecules which are known as the biological ligand, right? The second is a receptor molecule, and that receptor molecules are basically protein in nature, and these receptors are located in the surface of the cell or in the cell membrane structures. Other than ligand and receptors, in cell-to-cell communications, there are lots of proteins involved. That proteins are basically present in cell cytoplasm, and that proteins are part of this cell signaling cascade pathway. And another important component is the response or effector response. So we'll see how the different components is important in cell-to-cell communications. So you can see there is two cell. Both the cells are neuronal cell, and we know the neuronal cell is very important for us because it sends neuronal impulse or nerve impulse from neuronal cells to neuronal cells. But this neuronal impulse is it is basically carried out by certain types of molecules, and these molecules are neurotransmitters. So here neurotransmitters played an important role in the communication between neurons. But this transmission of impulse not only depends on the availability of the transmitter molecules, it depends on several other factors. So what are the other factors and where actually that factors are located? You can see here the first neuron. The most important features is inside the neuronal cell. You can see there are certain types of vesicular structures, and that vesicular structures contain some chemicals, and that chemicals are nothing, these are neurotransmitters or signal molecules. At the same time, you can see the outside of the neuronal cell there are some other types of molecules, and here the molecules which are present inside the neuronal cells, these are called internal signaling molecules. The molecules which are present outside the neuronal cells, these are external signaling molecules. Both the internal signaling molecules and external signaling molecules are very vital in signaling cascade. in signal transduction pathway in cell-to-cell communication. Here you can see this communication process involves 3 major steps. So these are the major steps. All the communication systems involve receiving, collecting and responding to appropriate information according to the cell signaling molecules, right? So whatever the response given by particular cells, that is totally influenced by the type of cells involved and the type of signaling molecule present, right? Here the signaling molecules are some internal signaling molecules present inside the neuronal cells or inside synaptic vesicles, and some are present in external side of the neuronal cells. Another important thing for the transmissions of that impulse by these signaling molecules, there must be a specific type of receptor in the cell surface membrane where the signaling molecules can bind. So you can see in the second neuron, the surface of the neuron, there are certain types of receptors, and all those receptors are very specific. They only can bind to the specific molecule. Non-specific molecules cannot bind with the specific receptor. So here in the second neuronal cell membrane contains specific receptor for both the internal neurotransmitter or internal signaling molecules and for external signaling molecules. As they are very specific to each other, they binds with each other, and once the binds, accordingly the receiving cell gives its response called cellular response. So these 3 are the most important event for any type of cell communications in multicellular organism. Receiving the impulse or receiving the signal, then collecting, and finally responding. Cellular response depends upon the signaling molecules and cell types, as I have already mentioned. So the signaling type or the communications, biological communications, are mainly 2 types: internal communications and external communications. You can see here the most important features here is it mainly involves the nervous and endocrine system. 2 different type of signaling molecules. One is signaling molecules presence in the nervous system. Another is signaling molecule presence in the endocrine system. Here it is hormone. In case of nervous systems, it is neurotransmitter. So these are important for the homeostasis and regulations of the vital body functions. We have already mentioned in our previous lectures the importance of homeostatic balance, right? Or how the internal stable condition is very vital for cellular functions. So here, to maintain that homeostatic balance, there are numbers of systems acts together. Here it is nervous systems and endocrine systems acts together to give a specific response. That response is very vital to maintain the homeostatic balance. So here the molecules, signaling molecules are neurotransmitter and hormones. You can see signaling molecules, and these are other signaling molecules. So another important type is called external communications. So external communications doesn't mean that the environment and cell. Here external communications involves the outside environment of a particular cell. Like in a particular tissue, there are numbers of cells. So there is a extracellular fluid outside cells. So here extracellular fluid environment acts as an extracellular environment here, right? So in this particular case, you can see in case of external environment, 2 important systems are involved. One is spatial sense and another one is nervous systems. Like if there is any changes in the external environment, that changes are sensed by our spatial sense organ, right? And to give a proper response by that particular spatial sense organ is regulated by our nervous system, right? It means like internal communications, external communications also involve certain types of systems. They work together. They work in a coordinated fashions to maintain the balance, right? Now see, what is cell signaling? Why this cell signaling is important? We have already got a little idea, but since as the terms is very simple, but this signaling mechanisms is very, very complex, right? You can see it is also known as signaling cascade or signal transduction pathway. So in this signaling cascade or in this signaling pathway, there are numbers of hormones involved. There are numbers of receptors involved. And based on the receptors involved, the type of response also changes, right? You can see this is the general overview. This is outside the cell called cell membrane. And if you see, the positions of a particular receptors are of different types. In some case, the receptors are present in the cell surface. In some case, the receptors are present in cell cytosol or in cytoplasmic area. But at the same time, we also can see some receptors are located into the nucleus or in RDN structures, right? So it means the locations or positions of the receptors are of different. Not only the positions, the signaling molecules, not all the signaling molecules bind to the same receptor. Some signaling molecules bind to the cell surface membrane receptor. Some signaling molecules bind to the cytoplasmic receptors. Some bind to the nuclear receptors, right? So here you can see, based on the type of signaling molecule, they bind with specific receptors, and accordingly they respond, the cell respond, right? So here you can see this one is the signaling molecule. Signaling molecules actually is a biological active molecule, right? And binding of that biological active molecule or that ligand, it is also known as the ligand. Binding of that signaling molecule to specific receptors is very vital. Here you can see these signaling molecules or these receptors is specific for this signaling molecule or ligand only. Whereas there is another receptors which is present inside nuclei, right? And that signaling molecules just cross the cell membrane barrier and it binds to the nuclear receptors. If you see the pattern of response, after binding two different signaling molecules into two different receptors, you will get, cell will give two different types of response, right? So a signal transduction pathway is a series of steps by which a signal on a cell surface or nucleus is converted into a specific cellular response. This is the ultimate thing, cellular response, and that cellular response is very vital to maintain the homeostatic balance of the cell. See, as I mentioned, the binding of signaling molecule or response by particular cells depends on the type of signaling molecule as well as the nature of receptor. Here you can see acetylcholine, it is a signaling molecule or ligand, right? Adrenaline, signaling molecule or ligand. Here it is also signaling molecule, but there are two different type of cell. One is myocardial cell and another one is skeletal muscle cell. In both the cell, if you see the first one, in case of myocardial cell, this is specific receptor for the acetylcholine which is present in cell surface, and this is specific receptor for adrenaline, and that receptor also present in membrane. But the binding of first one leads to the myocardial depressions, means the strength of the contractions of myocardial cells will be less once the acetylcholine binds to this specific receptor. But when adrenaline binds to these receptors, there is an activation of the myocardial cells. There will be strong contractions of the myocardium, right? So this is how two different signaling molecules or binding of two different signaling molecule to two different receptors in a specific cell give two different response. At the same time, with the changes of type of cell, here it is skeletal muscles, but the acetylcholine is the signaling molecule like the previous one. Once this binds with this receptor, there is a strong contraction of the skeletal muscles. But here, there is a less contractions of the myocardial muscle cell, right? So this is how, with the changes of the type of cells, the response also can vary, right? Now, as I've already mentioned, that there are in signaling cascade, these three are the most important part. Receptions means the binding of ligand to the receptor. Then transduction, very important. It is basically composed of several stages or steps, we can say. And finally, response. And this transduction stage or transduction steps actually involve the amplifications of the response after initial binding of ligands to the receptor, right? And based on the amplifications, the cell will give amplified response of that signaling molecule. Clear? Now see, what are the different types of receptors and how they are different from one another. This is the one cell membrane, this is another cell membrane. If you see the types, the first one is called ligand-gated ion channel receptor. And that ligand-gated ion channel receptor is very specific for ion transport only. See here in the first piece, this is also known as LGIC, ligand-gated ion channel receptor. Why it is specific? Because this receptor only allows ion once signaling molecule binds with this receptor. So where the signaling molecule binds? Yes, there is a specific site for the binding of this signaling molecule, right? Once signaling molecule binds with these receptors, there is a conformational changes in the ion channel. Before binding of signaling molecule, the ion channel ligand-gated ion channels is a closed receptors. Once signaling molecule binds, there is a conformational changes, and it opens up and it allows specific type of ion only from outside to inside of the cell. Then second is G protein coupled receptor, which is also known as GPCR, right? It is a transmembrane receptor. In this transmembrane receptors, a total number of helices are 7. That is why it is also known as 7 helices GPCR, right? Or G protein coupled receptors. Here also, these GPCRs or binding of specific ligand molecule into the GPCR leads to the transductions of this pathway or amplifications of this signaling cascade. Then enzyme-linked receptors. So, like previous ones, here the bindings of these signaling molecules, there is an activations of some inactive enzymes, right? There is an activations of some inactive enzymes in the signaling cascade. We will see how this enzyme-linked receptors is very vital in signal transduction pathway. And is the nuclear receptors, which is present in the nucleus, right? So, based on the types of signaling molecule involves, the receptors will act. This is the general overview. See how the ion binding, signaling molecule bindings leads to the entry of certain types of ion. Similar to this, yes, the most important features of GPCR is the G protein attached to the GPCR molecule. You have heard about the term G protein. G proteins is nothing. It is a protein molecules which played important role in transduction pathway. And if you see the component of the G protein, it is basically composed of 3 different subunits. Some are active subunit called catalytic subunit. Some are inactive or non-catalytic subunit. So we'll see how this catalytic subunit or active subunits played important role in signal transduction pathway. Another important is you can see enzyme-linked receptors. How the bindings of the signaling molecules leads to the changes in the conformations of these receptors. So these are some important types of signaling pathway receptors. Now let me take one example. Suppose steroid hormones. How the steroid hormones played an important role to maintain the homeostatic balance or to maintain the cellular response. As we know, the steroid hormones is very special because it not binds to the cell surface receptor. For the steroid hormones, it must raise to the nuclear receptors or cytosolic receptors, right? So once these steroid hormones enters inside cells or once it binds to the nuclear receptors, there is a changes in the gene expression pattern, right? So gene expression patterns changes leads to the formations of specific type of protein as a response. So here you can see how the steroid hormone actually act. In the first part you can see this is the receptor protein, and that receptor proteins are not present in the extracellular phase. It is present in intracellular part of the cell, and there is a cap for the steroid hormones, and in this cap the hormones binds and the forms is complex first. Once the forms complex, it enters into the cell nuclei to bind to the specific site of a nucleus, and once this complex binds to the specific site of the nuclear DNA, there are the changes in the expression pattern. The transcriptions of this DNA now produce a specific type of mRNA, and the altered expressions of this mRNA will give a specific type of protein, right, as a response. Here you can see there is a formation of proteins by the process of translation, right? So this is how the hormone molecules act as a signaling molecule or messenger molecules, and these are the part of these are different steps of these hormone actions. Now see, as I mentioned, the communications between cell or the signaling cascade is a very complex event. So what are the different type of signaling cascade? These are some important signaling cascade: cyclic AMP, protein kinase signaling cascade or signaling pathway, IP3 or inositol triphosphate calcium signaling pathway, DAG PKC pathway or diacylglycerol protein kinase C signaling pathway, nitric oxide cyclic ZMP signaling pathway, calcium signaling pathway, and MAPK signaling pathway called mitogen activated protein kinase signaling pathway, and ion conduction signaling pathway. So for all these different types of signaling pathway, the mechanisms also different. The signaling molecule involved also different. The receptor involved also different. Now let me take one example. See here. This is a signaling cascade called G protein linked signaling pathway or cyclic AMP PK signaling pathway. See how this signaling cascade amplify the cellular response once molecule binds to the specific receptors. So what is the positions of GPCR or G protein coupled receptors? It is a transmembrane receptor, right? So here the signaling molecule like hormones or others act as a first messenger in this pathway. So once this first messenger binds with this specific GPCR, it will produce a second messenger for the amplification of the transduction to amplify the cellular response. Clear? So you can see Once this first messenger binds to this G protein linked receptors, there is an activation of inactive G protein. I've already mentioned that G proteins involves the GPCR pathway, and this activated form of G protein activates some enzyme that are present inside the cell membrane called adenylyl cyclase or AC, and that activation of the AC is very vital in the signaling cascade because this enzyme catalyze the conversions of or formations of second messenger form ATP, right? So here second messenger form with these catalytic reactions is cyclic AMP, right? The first messenger was the signaling cascade, signaling molecule. Here it is hormone like epinephrine. These second messengers, as I mentioned, it amplify the other molecules involved in this transduction pathway. So it activates other molecules like protein kinase. Before the formations of this cyclic AMP, this protein kinase acts as inactive protein kinase enzyme. But once cyclic AMP are formed or activated form of cyclic AMP activates the protein kinase by some specific type of biological reactions called phosphorylation reactions, right? And that protein kinase or phosphorylated form of protein kinase gives a specific response. Now, it will be more clear now. This is what is the exact nature of signaling molecule and receptors. This is transmembrane receptors. Total number of helices here is 7, right? And now see about the G proteins. As I mentioned, there's 3 different subunits. Alpha subunit acts as a catalytic subunit. Once the signaling molecule binds with this GPCR, there is a detachment or dissociations of the G protein, mainly the alpha subunit from beta and gamma, right? And that G alpha subunit involved with the activations of that hormone adenylyl cyclase that are present inside the cell membrane. You can see this is AC or adenylyl cyclase, and that adenylyl cyclase acts as a biological catalyst. It catalyzes the reaction here. This is the reaction, ATP to cyclic AMP. And once cyclic AMP forms, there is a formation of active protein kinase from inactive biphosphorylation reactions. And this is important for the cellular response, right? At the same time, sometimes it is very essential to reduce the level of cellular response, like the formations of particular protein. It needs to reduce the synthesis of particular protein. So how it is reduced? It can be controlled by some other subunit of, right? You can see this beta and gamma subunit of G protein played an inhibitory role. It inhibits the action of enzyme AC that ultimately prevents the conversions of ATP to cyclic AMP. So it will reduce the level of amplification or cellular response. See, another important signaling cascade is called IP3 calcium signaling pathway or inositol triphosphate calcium ion signaling pathway. So all of us know calcium is very important for us. It involves the muscle contraction, but the synthesis or release of calcium from specific cell organelles is very vital, right? So what is that cell organelles which produce calcium ion? That is ER, right? So in the cell's cytosolic phase of the cell, the level of calcium ions or maintaining the calcium ion levels is very vital for muscle contractions or contractions of the muscle. So now question is how it is regulated. Yes, this is the regulatory mechanisms, IP3 calcium ion signaling cascade. So how? See, here again, this is the first messenger. It is a specific type of signaling molecule and it binds with this GPCR. Now, in previous case, what we have seen, there is an activation of adenyl cyclase enzyme that are present in the cell membrane or inner phase of the cell membrane structure. But here you can see the most important thing is another important enzyme called phospholipase C. So the activations of the phospholipase C again controlled by the G protein, mainly GTP binding G protein, right? And this phospholipase C is converted to two second messenger molecule. So what are these? These are called diacylglycerol and inositol triphosphate. Here in this signaling cascade, which one is the first messenger? This is the signaling molecule. It may be hormones, it may be other proteins, it may be other ligands. But once this signaling molecule binds, it forms second messenger molecule like diacylglycerol and inositol triphosphate. Both are second messenger molecule. Now, once this signaling molecule, second messenger molecule forms, they enters into two different pathway to give a different type of cellular response. Let me take one like IP3. Inositol triphosphate is a second messenger. For this second messenger, there is a specific site where it can bind, right? So what is the locations of that? You can see this is endoplasmic reticular membrane, right? So here in this membrane there is a specific channel, specific ion channel, that is calcium ion channel. Before the formations of this IP3 or inositol triphosphate, this channel was inactive, right? It doesn't allow the calcium ion from ER to the cytosol, right? But once this IP3 binds to the specific IP3 gated calcium channel, it allows the calcium ions to release from ER to the cytosolic phase. Clear? So now, in the cytosolic phase, the level of calcium is or molecules is very high. And here, this calcium ion also acts as a messenger. Now see, once this calcium ion forms, it activates different types of proteins, and that activated form of proteins are very essential for the cellular response. This is how the level of calcium ions are maintained. This is how, by the signaling cascade or with the involvement of IP3DAG, it involved with the functions of different type of cells. See, this is just general overview. Intracellular signaling pathways activated by extracellular signaling molecules. So here there is a list of extracellular signaling molecule. What are these list? Acetylcholine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, growth factor, nitric oxide. These all are extracellular signaling molecule. They all are binds with the receptor presence in the cell surface or receptor presence in the cell, right? Now, for these signaling molecules, there are specific receptor or target proteins. What are these target proteins? As I've already mentioned some of these. Like for acetylcholine, it is, for this, the receptors is ligand-gated ion channel receptors. Similar to this, you can see for adrenaline hormones, the receptors is G protein coupled receptor. Clear? Like another ones, like growth factors. For this, the specific target protein or specific receptor is tyrosine kinase link receptors. It means for every different type of signaling molecules, there is a specific type of target protein or receptor protein. And at the same time, the intracellular signaling pathway is also different. Let's say for adrenaline, the signaling pathway, just now I have mentioned, the pathway is cyclic AMP-PK pathway. But another important one, noradrenaline, like IP3 calcium ion pathway. So it means the type of signaling molecules acts in different signaling pathway. Clear? And accordingly, as they act through different signaling cascades, their natures of the response also will be different. So these are the different type of response. This is just an overview how the changes of signaling molecules or with the changes of signaling pathway, how response also can vary. Up to this clear? And out or no? G protein is a protein molecules, is an active component of signaling cascade. G protein has some specific structural features. So what are that structural features? It is composed of some subunit or protein subunit called alpha, beta and gamma subunit. One subunit acts as a catalytic subunit and another acts as a non-catalytic subunit. So both the subunit played an important role. One involves with the amplifications of the cascade, another involves with the reduce the level of amplifications of the signaling cascade, right? So here this G protein mainly activates a certain types of enzymes that are generally present in the cell membranes. Like one example I have given, that is the activation of adenylyl cyclase enzyme, which is present in the cell surface membrane or inner phase of the cell membrane. See, in previous class we have seen there are numbers of junctions. The junctions are very vital for the holding of adjacent cell. One of the junctions is the gap junctions. So what is the main features of that gap junction? Gap junctions is known as channel forming junctions. Gap junctions is the junctions which makes direct connections between cells that allows the flow of specific type of ion directly from cell to cell. So here it is called contact dependent signaling. The gap junction signaling is a contact dependent signaling where the two cells directly attached with each other by a certain types of junction, right? At the same time, in this case, another important one is the adjacent cell surface contains some specific receptors, and using this specific receptor, two cells attached with each other, right? So this is also a type of contact dependent signaling or direct communications. Now here cell signaling is either local or long distance. So to communicate the cells which are present distantly, it needs some messenger, it needs some signaling molecule, it needs some hormone, it needs some proteins. So what are those that involves the long distance signaling cascade, like paracrine signaling, synaptic signaling, endocrine signaling, autocrine signaling. So almost all the points most of us know. So let me just give you a brief description. These are the different types of molecules, signaling molecules. This is contact dependent, you can see. What is the meaning of contact dependent? Many of us know about the contact dependent. At the same time, there are many students, they don't even know basic features of this. So this is what? These are two adjacent cells and there is a specific receptor for the molecules, and the binding of the specific molecules to the specific receptors helps communicate between these two cells. So this type of communications or contact dependent or Juxtacrine signaling is basically found in immune systems. Immune cells communicate with each other by these contact dependent mechanisms. Another important type is called paracrine signaling. So what does it mean? You can see the first cell called signaling cell. It contains some vesicles. That vesicles contains the mediators that is released from this called local mediators. And if you see the target cells are not so far from the cells from where mediators are released, right? So this is the special features of the paracrine signaling. Here in this case, the releasing cells communicate with the nearby cell by releasing some mediator. So these are the local mediators, and they bind to the specific receptors of the target cell, and accordingly target cell will give response. Once this binds with the target cells, then only the actions of signaling cascade started, right? So some examples of this response of histamine binding, serotonin and prostaglandins. These are some important examples which you can see in paracrine signaling. What is synaptic signaling? As I've already mentioned, synaptic signaling involves two neural cells. They form a specific zones called synapse. In that synapse, there is a release of mediators called neurotransmitters here. So once this released here synaptic junctions, it binds to the specific receptors. Accordingly, the target cells will give response. So this is synaptic signaling or synaptic junctions. Now, endocrine, the most complicated one is the endocrine signaling, right? Because there are numbers of endocrine hormones. The actions or functions of all those hormones are not same. So to maintain those functions, the pathway is also different. That is why it is very complicated. Here's the most important thing is the target cells is far from the cells from where the mediators are released, and that mediators need some path to reach the target cell. So that path is the blood vessels, right, or body fluid. So through blood vessels or through body fluid, this mediator reaches to the target cells, and accordingly they will bind to the specific receptors and the cells will respond, right? So this is another important features of the endocrine communications or endocrine signaling. The last one called autocrine. Sometimes what we see, the cells which release the mediators, and that mediators acts in the same cells again, right? Because in the same cells there is a receptor for the mediators. So yes, you can see this is released from this, and once it is released, it binds to the same cells or receptor presence in the same cells. So these are different types of signaling pathway, or these are different types of cell-to-cell communication system. Now I hope up to this it is almost clear.